Hello and welcome to this episode of the World Discord Podcast. I am Joel Ostrow.
I don't know if you're actually Joel Ostrow, but I am Brian Endless.
I mean, we could go get our birth certificates and find ways to prove it, but let's not.
I was actually raising a philosophical question, but if you want to go all Obama on us, that's fine.
Well, there's that too.
Okay.
We have an episode that's going to really get people moving, don't we?
We do. I get it.
I'm feeling energetic. We're talking about big oil and big gas today in this episode in our series about who benefits from our wonderful fascist regime, right?
Excellent. Not just the fascist regime. Big oil's been there. Oh, maybe we've had a fascist regime longer than we're talking about.
I don't know. They're benefiting more, though.
They are.
Here, this is just, there's so much we could do on this, and there's no way we're going to cover all of it. But just 2 weeks ago, there was a report from a climate action group that revealed something that I wasn't aware of. Just before the election in 2024, apparently Trump held a closed-door meeting with big oil donors. Occidental, I guess, was one of the largest among them. And he promised to, and I quote, enact their wish list while asking them to donate $1 billion to his campaign.
I knew that one. That's a fun story.
You knew this one? Well, 2 weeks ago, Occidental announced that their profits had increased 240%. Not since Trump took office, since Trump started his war of choice in Iran.
Yep. April 2025 is when that promise was made. So just about 1 year, and he's fulfilling the promise more than anything else.
Well, this says it was on the campaign trail in 2024.
So the actual meeting was April 2025. We can get into that. He was talking to them before that, but they had a big meeting in April 2025.
Oh, yeah, they had one afterwards. But these were promises, yeah, for sure. Yeah, the article goes on to talk about that. But This was on the campaign trail. So since the war started, and I don't have the date in front of me, Occidental, as of May 5th, had announced they had raked in $1 billion just since the start of the war in Iran.
Yeah. By the way, newsflash, everyone, the Trump family is benefiting from the Trump presidency. Also, Trump's cronies are benefiting from the Trump presidency.
Correct. Yes. So just I'm sort of extrapolating because these figures come from May 5th and it's the 23rd. So this war has already cost Americans about $40 billion more in gas, just at the gas pump. We're not talking about household heating and things like that. The average American household is expected to pay $740 more in gas this year alone. And the top oil and gas companies are raking in, now wait for this one, $30 million every hour just in additional profits as a result of the war. Collectively, oil and gas is estimated to have given Trump somewhere between $75 and $100 million during the campaign. So that gives you an idea. This regime is in a very oil slick bed with oil and gas. With that, I will turn it over to our anti-capitalist friend here, Brian Endless, to tell us about the evil sins of our economic system and how they...
I am not completely anti-capitalist, just anti-predatory capitalist, which is kind of everything that we see around us right now. So okay, we got a little bit of that. This is the series, this is the part of our series on who benefits, and big oil is all about who benefits. I am going to say you raised some of the recent stats. The numbers are much worse than those basics that you said. Big oil or big oil and gas or big fossil fuels, we're going to use those words interchangeably. There's, people talk about them as a group. Big oil is complicated. And that is exactly the way the oil companies and executives and owners like it. They want it to be
so
complicated that we can't tell what's going on, that we have no idea even what to look for. They have built a gigantic legal and financial and practical web of oil-related companies that are profiting from our burning of fossil fuels. That's just the basics.
For sure. Hey, can I jump in one sec to give a little, because I think it's important, because we're doing this whole series on who benefits. And for example, our next episode is going to be on who's benefiting from the private prisons, detention centers. The difference in this topic is, while you're right, it is a very sort of spidery web of interconnected companies and subsidiaries that can be really hard to follow. The flip side of it is, because it is such an enormous part, not only our own, but of the global economy, and so integral to the functioning of industry, for example, there's also been a lot of research over the decades into this. So even though it's complicated, we have a lot of information on really who's benefiting on this.
If you're willing to read all the books and reports, you can get almost all the information. The interesting thing is, we talk about the big web. In fact, we should be talking about 20 to 40 people. And this has come up over and over again in the who benefits section, and we'll get into some of those names. It's a tiny number of people driving this with a gigantic web profiting from this. One thing to add to what you had said, do you know who the number one user of fossil fuels in the United States is?
Brian Endless.
Nope, that would be incorrect.
I'm close. Number 2 then, right?
I do use I take very long showers. I've got to
look. I have a big carbon footprint at this house that I'm not proud of. I have a 300-gallon reef aquarium system in my home with old equipment, because that's the equipment I know. It's bad, as George W. Bush would have said. It's bad.
Let's start this, though, with how we can fix it, because this is something that I tell my students every year. They always bring up, well, why do you make us use so much paper, professor? And why do we have to buy all these books instead of using stuff online? And they're all whining about all those kind of things. And I let them know first, paper is a renewable resource. And fossil fuels aren't renewable, but you're not doing any good just by saving things yourself. If you want to actually fix our pollution problems, our climate problems, you need to go to the source. You need to stop these companies. So I have a suggestion that I would never make to my students, and I would never make to you or to any of our listeners, Joel. There's something you should never do if you actually want to stop this crisis. You should never go to the biggest polluting factories and companies, and you should never grab their CEOs and top officers and take them out of the office and take them out of the roof and chain them to the smokestack and make them breathe the smoke from their pollution and drink the water from their polluted rivers.
And ladies and gentlemen, the people in the dark suits and dark glasses are knocking at Brian's door, so that's the end of this episode.
I recommend you never do that. Don't. It'd be very, very bad. Notice I'm wagging a finger. That would be very, very bad. Don't do that.
They're still knocking at your door.
Yeah.
Who could it be knocking at your door?
They want us to do the little stuff, and we need to fix the big problems. Let's get a little more practical.
Let's go.
On this. So if you want to get to the economic question of who benefits,
the Koch brothers.
They do. How did you know that? Oh, wait, it's the generic answer. Yeah, I've changed my classes, by the way. The generic answer used to be either Ben Franklin or Gandhi or FDR or sometimes, MLK. Now the generic answer is the Koch brothers, just for pretty much everything. What we need to do to start, though, is a little bit of an econ lesson to understand what's going on here. So, if you don't already understand the harm caused by the massive profits that go into the fossil fuel, buckle your seatbelts. We're going to throw out some numbers. Let me get the first numbers, because I think that I'm going to give you 3 numbers that tell the entire story of what's going on here. Big oil revenues per year are $3 to $4.3 trillion. Those are known numbers. There's a little bit of wash in. We're not sure, depending on how you count it, between the 3 and 4.3. B, big oil profits per year are $100 to $110 billion. And that's probably going to go up this year.
Oh, yeah.
It's not as much as some major tech, but there's a lot of money that comes into big oil. Now here's the other number. C, subsidies per year, the amount that we put into big oil. are
Taxpayers.
someplace between $1.3 trillion. That's the low end. And that would mean it's about a third of oil revenues. If subsidies are 1.3 trillion, those are direct subsidies going to oil companies. The high end of subsidies, though, $7 trillion.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever believed that high end number.
You know what, though? I'm going to tell you how we get to it. Remember, by the way, $7 trillion is almost double that $3 to $4 trillion. What this stat is saying is that the subsidies are double, not the profits, but the costs, which means if this is anywhere near true, even if it's $5 or $6 trillion, we can take off $1 trillion or $2 trillion here, because, you know, that's nothing when you're in the trillions. We can take off $1 trillion or $2 trillion, and that number is still, we spend more than oil is worth. Oil should be a loser if it comes in correctly economically. Real quick, let me give you the facts behind that math. So that $1.3 trillion or so are what's called direct subsidies. This is money given by governments to the bottom line of these companies, a third to a quarter of total revenues. These make costs to producers lower, or these often go to consumers to subsidize costs. So U.S. is one of the rare countries where we don't get much. Alaska gives consumers money to subsidize. But like in Britain, when there's an oil crisis, they pay citizens money. They take money off of the gas bills for citizens. And the government gives it to the citizens. Iran is one of the, and actually every country in the Middle East that exports oil are gigantic subsidizers to their people. They give their people nearly free oil. So those are all parts of those subsidies. There was a huge increase globally in subsidies in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. Price caps come into this. Excuse me, all of these things go into direct subsidies. There's no question about that 1.3 trillion. That's an easy number to figure out. Now, let's talk about the indirect or implicit subsidies. These are things that are up to $7 trillion that oil is costing us, that we are subsidizing, and we're not even starting to take them into account. And it really falls into three areas. The first one is pollution. The second,
so you're talking about costs of externalities is what you're talking about.
Exactly. Oh, that word, externalities. That's such a happy econ word.
But those aren't, I mean, economists don't call those subsidies, but go ahead.
Hang on, we got to get into it, though. You don't have to call them subsidies, but people talking about oil and all those books that were written do. So air pollution, climate change, which is separate from air pollution, and the social costs of road accidents, congestion, things like that.
So that doesn't even add in water pollution?
Air and water pollution, all kinds of pollution. So immediate pollution versus climate change are the two different things. These are, use the right word, externalities. Economists call them externalities instead of subsidies, but they are an incredibly real part of the costs. So you look at air pollution, water pollution, there's no political debate about this even now. They damage human health. Now we have some political debate about how much they damage human health, which is why I think it's good to have all the CEOs drinking from their rivers and breathing from their factories to show that, for them to show us that it's safe. I just want them to show us that the pollution is safe and that it's not a big deal. I don't want to harm them. I want to follow their word. Second, then, is climate change. We've got a big political issue about climate change. We'll talk about why that's a political issue, because it's not a real scientific issue. Climate change is the long-term effects of fossil fuels, and then the costs of those long-term effects. Floods, hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, changes in temperature, losing rainforest, all of these things are long-term
refugee
costs.
Flows, things like that.
Exactly. Long-term costs. And then the social costs, when there are accidents on the road, when there's congestion that takes time. When economists talk about externalities, this is kind of a weird thing, because the companies say that they're being good capitalists here. But if you want to actually be a good capitalist, when you put together the cost of an item, it should be the materials that go into it, plus the labor, plus, of course, you take some profit back on your investment. This is capitalism. Let's assume that for a minute. And you need to include all of the externalities because
Right.
somebody's going to pay them.
Right.
And
So
that's
that's
the
how
key.
we end up calculating it if you want to, like you are, as
Exactly.
a subsidy. It's an expense that the industry should have that is not being applied to them.
100%. So when they sell us a car, they should be paying for the pollution at the factory that went into the car, paying for the pollution that came from mining the minerals that went into the car. When they sell us oil, they should be paying for the pollution to get it out of the ground, the pollution that comes from creating it, and the pollution when we drive it. And either the company should be paying this or the consumer should be paying. Doesn't matter which, either one is fine. So, like Europe does this by charging a bigger gas tax than the United
Correct.
States does, as an example. That's great. That's taking care of an externality. But there is so much money in these. We're talking about $6 trillion,
Yeah.
and that's actually, by the way, that's an IMF number, International Monetary Fund.
Yeah.
Conservative economists are coming up with that $7 trillion number, which is just insane. Somebody has to pay this, and because they're not being paid, we, you, me, our kids, our grandkids, if we have them, people into the future, are paying this with the damages these things are causing, and we now have to take care of the damages.
But these are costs incurred. We're not necessarily, for most of these, not, in fact, not, nobody's paying. People are dying. We might be paying like really indirectly with higher like home insurance costs
Right.
or housing costs, right? But nobody's actually paying to address these harmful effects for the most part.
No. And this is where climate change comes in. We pay by
Yeah.
dying. We pay
Yeah.
by floods that destroy
Yeah.
property, hurricanes that destroy property, wildfires. We're sitting in the Chicago area, and we are the most affected city in the country the last 3 years by wildfires on the West Coast and in Canada, because
Yeah.
the air currents are bringing the bad air down to us, and we happen to be getting the effects because of just what the currents are doing now.
But it is also worth noting, right? And this is why I push back a little on the 7 trillion number, Brian, is at least in the context of who benefits, they're benefiting by not paying for those costs, but they're also bearing the costs. For example, in the California wildfires, there were executives, mid-level and upper-level executives from fossil fuel companies who lost expensive homes in those fires, right? Like, so they're not directly benefiting in that sense.
You know what? Tell that to the Koch brothers, because the Koch
They are
brothers,
directly benefiting.
exactly. The Koch brothers network and those 20 to 50 to 100 people who support them heavily are massively
benefiting. And that's the important point of this series, right? It's a handful of people. Okay.
Yeah, it's not some big cabal. And yeah, in general, most oil company investors and big investors and CEOs are in general benefiting. Yes, they might take some losses with houses. When you get $100 million a year,
they're billionaires.
You notice it when you lose your $10 million house, but you don't notice it as much as you and I would if something like that happened, certainly. So that brings us into who benefits. Who benefits and how and why do they benefit? It seems pretty obvious what's happening here. The numbers might be a surprise to some. You and I might dicker a little bit over the numbers. We can say dicker, by the way, right? That's not biased.
You can say it.
I can say it. Okay, you won't say words like that.
I would never.
Those are mean words. I just want to make sure I'm not accidentally insulting when I say it. So the numbers might be a surprise, but the fact that big oil is making lots of money and a tiny number of owners and investors are making lots of money and the government is contributing to that doesn't surprise many of us. So I want to go through a really quick history of how we got here. And this is going to be where the Koch brothers come in. That's K-O-C-H, Koch brothers. Charles Koch, who's still alive, and his brother David Koch, who was really big on the oil issues, who died a couple of years back. But they're still, brothers at heart, and they still caused a lot of this. So we'll keep them together for these reasons.
In convention, we refer to them as the Koch brothers. It's not just us that.
No, absolutely.
that conglomerate has come to be known as the Koch brothers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the Koch brothers network
Yeah,
actually is a big piece of
that's right.
this that's come in. So since the 70s, leaders in the oil industry have been working to not just get government off their backs, but to have government support their efforts. And there are explicit and implicit benefits that come with this. What we're talking about are the implicit benefits. And you got to watch these because they are worth much, much more.
Oh yeah.
What the Koch brothers look at, Charles Koch, and I think I mentioned this in an earlier show, is famous for this. Charles Koch got to a point where he was so, and this is a story he's told in an unofficial autobiography, by the way. Charles Koch was so rich that he realized there was only one entity that could control him, and that was the government. And this was actually the beginning of the libertarian movement when
Yep.
Koch started funding small government, keep government off of our backs, meaning keep government off my very rich back.
And
And
his goal, oddly, was, we now know, was really to flip it, right? Get government off my back, and I'm going to get on government's back and steer it, which is
exactly.
yeah.
And you put those two things together, you get your explicit and implicit benefits. So what are his big implicit benefits? Lower taxes, that's the easy one, but that's not as important in the oil industry as regulation, as the definitions of what counts as pollution, as the definitions of who's liable for things. Is the CEO criminally liable for a big oil spill that costs billions of dollars?
Right.
How much does the oil company have to
Right.
pay? We now have things in law that are, there's a normal amount of pollution that we should expect when a oil tanker goes someplace. Not zero. They deballast and they let out oil. There's a normal amount of pollution when factories use coal and oil. I don't know about you, Joel, but literally, I'm going to keep going back to these smokestacks because I honestly think they're important in describing this to individuals. I call it pollution if I walk up to a smokestack and put my head over it and breathe in. You were from those drug-addled days, maybe like somebody breathing through a water pipe. But if I breathe in,
I'm looking on your shelf back there to see if you have one of those.
I do not. I have weapons. I don't have many bongs back here at all.
Many, yeah,
because those were illegal for a long time. Anyway, if you breathe in from that smokestack, are you going to die? Are you going to get cancer? Are you going to have a massive coughing fit? Or is that clean air coming out of the smokestack? Because if I have any negative effects, that is pollution.
Yep.
And you are free to do anything you want to at your factory as long as it doesn't harm us, as long as it doesn't harm the rest of us. That's my definition of pollution. The Koch brothers and their network didn't like my definition of pollution, so they redefine it. And now they get to pollute a certain amount of particulate matter into the air. And they have their own scientists, many of whom aren't actually climate scientists, who determine what those numbers are. So that's the kind of stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So the Koch brothers network, this was formally established in 2003, but it's been active since the 1970s. It's actually the start of the Libertarian Party in the United States. A lot of people know them as the Freedom Party, the Liberty Party, the Get Government Out of Business Party. Not everybody realizes David Koch, the younger Koch brother, was their vice presidential candidate in 1980. Yeah. And he had a key political quest. He was very public about it. He wanted to get small government by abolishing the newly created Department of Energy. You know what the Department of Energy was supposed to govern, Joel?
Tiddlywinks.
Yes, or oil.
Oh, yeah, and oil.
Fossil fuels. And those things. He wanted to get rid of that Department of Energy. Libertarians were not a Republican Party at first. They were against both the Dems and the Republicans. David Koch lost. And what he realized when he put a lot of money into his campaign and he lost was that saying that we should allow big companies to pollute is not something that people are going to like.
Right.
You can't go after it that way. You have to be more indirect about it. Government helping big oil was a loser. And this sent Charles and David Koch behind the scenes. And they came up with a 3-part plan that has been in effect since that point in time. They want to do 3 things. They want to control public information. They want to set up think tanks to start building the messages that come out in politics, and they want to do lobbying to get politicians behind them. And
And they
this
put
started in the
billions into all three of those efforts.
Exactly. And they realized that the best way to do this is not just to use their own money, but to convince a tiny number of additional billionaires to give them money to fund these things. And that's where the Koch brothers network comes from. Was doing some research on it the past year or two. There are now over 440 different organizations in the Koch brothers network. You and I haven't heard of most of them, and we seem to be relatively educated. But the big ones are things like the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, Americans for Prosperity, the American Petroleum Institute. These are just some of the gigantic things that the Koch brothers started.
But also a lot of those white Christian nationalists and evangelical, the anti-abortion movement, the gun,
absolutely,
the
Tea
gun
Party
industry movement, all of that stuff.
The Tea Party is another. By the way, guns are a little bit separate. I'm just doing some research on this now. The Kochs actually didn't give that much money to the gun movement, to the 2A movement. That's one of the few things they were out of, that they didn't have a lot of interest in. But that's a minor thing.
It's another. Anyways, that would be for a different episode.
Exactly, different show. But what did they do? They started with Cato, and the idea here was you can't tell people that pollution is good for them, so you need to change your messaging, and you need to approach this in different ways. You have to show them why they should focus on smaller government, which really just benefits the centimillionaires and billionaires, but you have to make it look like it benefits them. And you tie it to things like religion and like abortion and those types of things, those culture issues, to get more and more people on your side. And they turn this libertarian movement into a mainstream Republican movement in the United States. And then this built up over time. 2004, Americans for Prosperity comes out. They start really focusing on lobbying and elections and campaigns, led up to 2010 with Citizens United, and then everything cut loose after 2010. I want to take us back real quick. Something I didn't realize until I started looking at this oil thing. Climate change debates in the U.S. Congress didn't actually start until about 2008.
Yes,
I really thought it was sooner than that. But
there were congressional hearings and investigations, but there weren't.
No, but in 2008, didn't really happen. Yeah, both sides, Democrats and Republicans, in the 2008 election, they were saying climate change exists and they want to do different things, but they agree it's got to be fixed. And climate denial, as we call it now, raising doubts about the climate, really started from 2008 to 2000.
No, I mean, Jim Hansen was censored under the George W. Bush administration. The climate denial definitely started in a political sense in the early 2000s.
Yes, there were a couple people. Those people were actually typically from oil states. And they certainly did exist in that way. I'm saying the major campaign for climate denial. So you're absolutely correct that individuals started on it earlier, but a small number of billionaires and centimillionaires worked together. They're people who made massive benefits. Names like Harold Hamm is one that's not a household name, huge in fossil fuels. Tim Dunn, a hedge fund manager, Kelsey Warren. You can go to the opensecrets.org and track all of these things down as they're there. They led into a lot of people in government and people in government working on these kind of things. James Inhofe, the Nebraska senator, was the huge climate denier. I don't know how many people realize it. He has one of my favorite speeches ever in the history of the Senate. Inhofe got on the floor of the Senate with a snowball. And he said, this was in March or so in Washington, D.C.
It had snowed in Washington, one of those freak snowstorms.
Yeah, he said, global warming can't possibly exist, or I wouldn't be able to hold this snowball right now. That was the kind of argument that was being made. It was ludicrous.
And it's not because he's an idiot. It's because he was profiting from his ties to big oil.
Exactly, no doubt
Yep.
about it. So, yeah, direct subsidies, smaller government, but pollution laws and damages were the big thing. Huge one in the early 2000s, the Koch brothers and several others, when some of the climate stuff started getting into federal lawsuits, when the government started really going after these companies, there were some lawsuits that had criminal liability for
Yeah.
pollution and for oil spills.
Yeah.
And that was huge for these investors because they could go to jail for this stuff
Correct.
if they were seen to be behind it. That was number one on their list of things they had to stop. And
Yeah.
they had to put in rules and have politicians who put in rules saying no criminal liability,
Right.
only at the most civil liability and tiny
Right.
amounts of civil liability for anything that would go on there. I'll go one more thing and then I'll throw it up to you and see if you want to add anything, and then we can go to the Trump administration. So, one of the things that happened starting in the late 2000s was their focus changed from the other regulation they had, from getting rid of regulations, limiting taxes, to stopping discussions of climate change. This group realized that climate change was very popular, that the climate change movement was popular, that people were following it, that the majority of Democrats and Republicans looked at it favorably. And they started an underground movement in universities and think tanks. And then they gave speeches that public figures gave and that politicians gave. And they started what's become anti climate science.
Yeah.
And any reasonable human being is going to put the science part in quotes because there's no science behind anti climate change. Climate change, the idea that humans are changing the climate faster than it would change otherwise, exists. It's as
Yeah.
close to a scientific fact as is there. Anybody who tells you it doesn't exist needs to go to school and needs to get some more learning and some more ciphering to figure out what's going on. So they started attacking not the science, but they attacked the politics of it. They attacked whether it would cost too much money to do all these things that the
Yeah.
climate people wanted to do. They attacked the numbers. Are the numbers really real? By the way, you attack big numbers because people don't understand big numbers. So you kind of started this off by attacking my $7 trillion number. You know what?
Yeah.
You and I can talk about whether this is 7 trillion or 4 trillion all
But
day.
not
And
civilly, we can't.
yeah, most people, well, yes, but most people don't give a, most people have no idea what those numbers mean. So talking numbers is a distractor. It is a
Yeah.
good thing. The other thing they did, and this is where they got really smart. If you remember, some people might know the term swift boating when John Kerry
Oh,
was swift
yeah.
boated.
Yeah.
They started attacking the people. They started
Yeah.
attacking the scientists. They started looking up marital affairs and the pasts
Yeah.
of these scientists and the traffic tickets and little things they might have been in trouble for legally or taxes. And they started making the topic about how the scientists were bad people instead of the
Right.
science being bad science.
And how they
And
were, ironically, how they were profiting. Like
absolutely.
somehow the climate science research was driven by profit. Like
And
the double speak, the sort of Orwellian double speak of what is really turning into fascism here in America. You can trace right to the Koch brothers, and as you alluded to at the beginning, but that was really the strategy. When Brian was talking earlier about changing how they communicate, it was lying, straight out lying, and accusing the others of doing what they themselves are doing, like classic doublespeak stuff.
Absolutely. And it is so much of it goes back to them. And it's the think tanks that they set up that
Yeah,
created these lies and
right.
that popularized these lies. And what they understood is what Orwell told us and many others have. When you say it often enough, people
Mm-hmm.
start to believe it.
Yep.
And then the other thing, in addition to saying it often enough, when you lie often enough, people don't call you a liar. People start to doubt the truth and doubt that
Correct.
the truth exists. And
Correct.
those are some of the main things behind the way that big oil is generating money, and they keep generating profits. And these small number of people laugh their way all the way to the bank.
And what's really kind of funny, not funny, is the the political operatives behind MAGA were so convinced by the success of this by the success of really the old success of the tobacco lobby, but more recently the energy lobby.
Absolutely. By the way, I
Against
don't remember the guy
regulation.
who started the energy lobby, but it was the exact same lawyer who won the tobacco lobby
It
cases
is. Yep.
and we set up that
Yeah.
strategy.
There's a great documentary that is quite old now called Merchants of Doubt, but is still quite relevant to this story, and sort of will give you the deep history on the climate denial stuff, like back to the 1990s even.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's insane how much goes into the background of this. We start this just talking about who benefits from oil. You can't understand who benefits from oil without seeing this gigantic, complex picture that's going on behind the scenes. And it's so complicated that it's hard to fight because nobody understands where you should start fighting it and what you should start doing to fight against it.
But we need to. Can we get some? Are you going to get into some data on the how much these companies are and execs are benefiting?
Yeah, so
I have a little bit, but
I kind of did the big picture number. The biggest beneficiary is ExxonMobil
yep.
at $35 billion a year. And then there are 5 companies that amount to about 80 billion of the 110 billion. And then another 30 or 40 companies that are bringing in the rest of us. But that's the direct profit. What we don't know and what I haven't seen calculations on is how much any given person or any given company is getting from the indirect profit. By the way,
an
the
organization called Americans for Tax Fairness, and they've got figures on combined executive compensation for the biggest companies, but also, so just an example, the combined executive compensation, so this is incorporated profit for 2025 at Exxon was $560 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was an additional 73 billion in stock buybacks.
Yep.
And an additional 80 billion in dividend payouts. So that's, if you had 150 billion total,
yep.
you're talking, that's a lot of money. Like
and
almost
what you're looking at here,
billion.
there might be,
but then add to that, the effective federal tax rate, corporate and income tax paid by those executives in 2025 at Exxon, 1.3%.
Oh, it's higher than 0%. Their accountants need to work on that if it's that
oh, but there are others that are in the negatives.
Yep. Yeah, so, it's amazing. So now,
Chevron's numbers are similar. Conoco, Marathon, those are the biggest ones. All of these figures are similar. Exxon's just the biggest, but you scale down a little bit for size for the other corporations.
Let's be clear on compensation, though. Unless you are a finance CEO, you're probably not a billionaire. You might be a 100 millionaire, centimillionaire.
Yeah.
The people we're talking about, though, so the Koch brothers, as an example, Charles Koch, chairman, not president, and his money comes from massive different investments that are all tied up in different LLCs and different company organizations. It's very difficult, if not
it's not salary. That's salary. Why we're talking about. That's why the big numbers, right, are
exactly.
not the numbers in the tens of billions of dollars are the stock buybacks, the stock dividends. Right?
Exactly.
They're not. That's not salary compensation. And that's why Elizabeth Warren wanted a wealth tax.
Correct.
Elizabeth Warren, among others, but she was the leading voice.
People like the famous ones, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, $1 in salary.
$1 in salary.
That's to avoid taxes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And they keep their money.
But they've rigged the tax. Like, it's important to know, like the Koch brothers, we're talking about getting on the back of government and steering it. They've steered tax policy so that these dividends and stock, so that they're not paying taxes on that stuff.
Right. I don't know if we're going to do it, if we're planning on doing a show on tax policy, but I think Who Benefits Tax Policy would be a really good show.
It's so boring, but we probably should.
We'll make it exciting.
And that's why they're able to do it, because it is mind-numbing.
Yeah,
tax
it's
law.
incredible. And but this is very relevant to oil. The tax book, let's say the tax book is this big and it's,
Yeah,
just off the top of the screen. It should probably be this big if we're going to have
yeah,
a fair tax system.
yeah.
All of this is benefits for a tiny number of people. It's not
Right.
harming. It's not making yours and my taxes harder. Our
But it
taxes are
is
easy.
taxes are they don't have to be mind-numbingly boring. It's again, it's
Yeah,
all about how we communicate. And those of us on the progressive side of the spectrum uh, are not good at communicating really about any policy issue like they are on the right. But here's the thing: people can. I complain about $5.50 gas at the pump. I complain about it now because all that money is going to people like the Koch brothers
exactly.
and the other people, hopefully in the tied to Trump that we'll get to in a minute. If it were because of taxes to drive incentives towards clean energy, towards lower carbon footprint, electric vehicles, solar energy, I'd be all for that, right?
Yep.
Tax in the name of policy regulation that would harm the billionaires because we would stop we would find the incentives to go in, that's fine.
Yep.
But this money is not taxes, it's going to the billionaires, and there's no way it comes back to benefit us.
And as with everything the reason we're doing this series is taxation. The question, I completely agree with you. The question is who benefits. If the
Right.
people were benefiting from the taxation, I am absolutely in
Yeah.
favor of
Right.
higher taxation for people in reasonable tax brackets, lower
Yeah.
for people in
Tax the
lower
wheat
tax.
and let it go to the public schools. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And then
But
you
it
can
doesn't.
decide if you want to pay the tax and smoke the weed or not.
Yep.
Uh,
But it doesn't go there, and it goes to
Brian's
the
got
rich.
all those bongs on his shelf. Of course, he's
Hey,
paying those
no,
taxes and stuff.
that's
But
not a bong. That's a battle
oh yeah,
axe. I wish you'd get it right.
I'm practicing the disinformation.
And that big thing back there is a Serbian brandy bottle that someone gifted me. So
It doesn't look
that's
like it
kind of
would hold a
cool
lot of
too.
liquid. It looks kind of sharp. Anyway, let's go. Who is benefiting now in this regime?
So Trump administration. Fossil fuels are a huge indirect beneficiary. You covered some of it. The starting point is, for some reason that some people don't understand, but it's not that hard to understand, Trump has engaged in a campaign to roll back alternative energy.
No,
It's amazing.
I didn't
I don't
hear
know
about that.
why. I don't know how, but he's doing it. I clearly remember 15 years ago, the United States government goes to international climate conferences, and our excuse for not fixing all of our climate problems was, you know what, we might fix ours, but then the Chinese will cheat and the
Yeah.
Chinese will do dirty energy and the Chinese will get ahead of us. And now we're the country that is
Cheating.
just not only saying no alternative energy, we're charging people for alternative energy. We're talking about taxing electric vehicles instead of giving tax credits now. And the Chinese are the leaders in the world in alternative energy and are making gigantic profits off of it. And they're supplying the rest of the world, and they're cleaning up their pollution problems, which will help climate change in the long run, and helping other countries do it. We've completely.
Well, let's be accurate here. China is the largest producer and consumer of clean energy,
Correct.
solar, wind, hydro.
Yep.
China is also the largest emitter of carbon,
They are.
oil and gas and coal.
But
China's a really big country, a really big economy with a whole lot of people.
I
So
believe
they are
though,
both the dirtiest and the cleanest economy, have been for at least a decade.
correct me if this one's wrong. I think the other stat we have to throw in there, this is off the top of my head, so we'll need to look it up, is China has also reduced their emissions more than any other country.
And they have reduced their emissions more than any other country.
Yeah. So
all
those
of those
put
things
together
are
can
true
be
at
true
the
at
same
once.
time. All of that is to say China's really fucking big.
Yeah, it's true. But they're also really focusing on environment.
Yes,
and
they see the future. They're smart. They play the long game, and they are the leader in electric vehicles and clean energy production. Solar panels, like you name it, they're number one. Anyway, let's go Trump.
Here's your American quiz, Joel.
Uh-oh.
Which state in the United States has more alternative energy going
Texas.
into their power grid? Texas. Texas had that big breakdown of their
Yep.
entire power system a
Yep.
few years ago. And since that point in time, the Republican governor and Republican legislature of Texas have led Texas to add
Yep.
so much wind power and so much solar power that now the majority of their grid comes from alternative energy sources.
Yep.
This is a huge oil state. It's doable. It's not, doesn't have to be a political thing. You know, we need the alternative energy. So it's, I like to say, I wanted to bring this up here, and I think this is probably the title of this episode. I don't think oil is an oligarchy of oil. We can call it an oilgarchy.
Oilgarchy, cool.
Yeah, I didn't coin that. Somebody else did, but I'm going to steal it anyway for this one. What do we have? In the United States, the current U.S. administration, the Trump administration, has nominated a huge number of climate deniers from the oil and gas and coal industry to be in the cabinet and to be in key government positions. So just a few off the top, the head of the EPA, Representative Lee Zeldin, one of the primary climate deniers in Congress, head of the Energy Department, Representative Chris Wright, the CEO of a fracking company, one of the biggest fracking companies.
Wasn't Zeldin also tied to Exxon at one point? Am I wrong about that?
Yes, I believe Zeldin was Exxon. That's correct. The head of the Interior, Doug Burgum, who was a former governor of North Dakota and tied to fossil fuels.
Chevron, I believe.
What's that?
I think he was tied to Chevron.
He might have been. You may know that better than I do. And then total, the top 15 oil billionaires, just the top 15 in this country since April of 2024, have seen their wealth rise $40 billion from $267 billion to $309 billion in the past 2 years. It is insane how much that number has gone.
So besides Coke, who else are we talking about? Do you have some examples of?
I don't have that number. So the other one is absolutely, oh God, I can never remember the guy's name. I'm sorry. Hamlin, starts with an H, and I can't remember. It's in my notes somewhere. Anyway, there's a couple of really big ones, and then a bunch of smaller ones, smaller billionaires that go into it. This is one of those things I'll remember in the shower tomorrow. Harold Hamm. I'm sorry.
That's it, Harold Hamm. And do we know what their combined contributions were to the inauguration and the campaign?
Yes, in fact, the oil industry together spent $220 million to influence the elections and to influence the Trump administration. That's $220 million to gain $40 billion. That's money well spent, and spent to the direct problems, direct neglect of all of the rest of us. It's absolutely
insane. Those donations lowered their taxes.
They did. Kind of incredible.
Which were already, that's how some of them end up with negative taxes, right? They're getting refunds, these billionaires.
Yeah. Joe was mentioning that meeting in Mar-a-Lago. It was a meeting of fossil fuel CEOs. Trump's done a lot of government business at Mar-a-Lago. In this case, in April, a private meeting of fossil fuel CEOs. And this is the one where he promised that if they get $1 billion for his campaign, this was in April of 24, he will do whatever they ask. Anything that they want, he will do it for them. This is just the big picture, but it has been amazing the way we've had a direct and clear and public transfer of wealth. The public part's the interesting thing that's changed in the Trump administration. They're so blatant about it.
And if we want to know why, because we don't have evidence, I'm sure at this point, people like Kushner and the Trumps have major investments in the fossil fuel industry with insider trading, before the war. I'm sure they increased those investments. Like, all of that is certainly true, but they don't have prior strong connections to energy. That was just never any of the family's main gig. So why are they doing this? Because this is Donald Trump wanted his revenge tour in office, and also wanted to profit off of it, like he didn't in his first term at this level. So, but he knew that oil and gas had the money to really finance their seizure of government, and had been so effective, as Brian, as you laid out in the first half of this episode, over the years in capturing our political system, he partnered with them so that, and promised them anything they wanted, so that he and his cronies could also do whatever they wanted and profit in the other sectors that we've been talking about and will talk about in future episodes.
And interesting,
it's a marriage made in hell.
Yeah, interesting for Trump that you and I often talk about how much he and the family are profiting. I think this is one of the places where, when you mention the revenge tour, this is important. Trump has really realized in his second term and is now very much taking advantage of the fact that he controls Republican politics and party politics, and he can control it at the primary level.
We've certainly seen that this week when he got rid of hardcore right-wing Republicans just because at some point they may have said something unkind or taken a vote that he didn't like.
But he does that both through his personality, both through his personal power as the head of MAGA, and through this $1 billion campaign slush fund that he can decide where it goes. It went to his
and so much of that money came from oil and gas, right?
Exactly, and it comes from.
And we don't really know that $1 billion slush fund. Well, the 1.8 billion slush fund to give to the criminals, but he's got these political action committee super PAC slush funds that he was raising for quote unquote legal fees during the campaign, where he can use that money however he wants, and huge portion. We don't know what the total is, but as you said, it's upwards of maybe a third of $1 billion just from the fossil fuel industry.
Well, and let's take a look at this. I think the biggest numbers here are the ones you asked me about just a minute ago. $220 million in donations, $40 billion in profit. If you give me $220 million if I give you $220 million and you end up giving me $40 billion in profit, when you come to me next week and say, hey, can I have a donation? The checkbook is out and I just ask how much and fill in more zeros, because you are worth it. Yeah, you're worth every penny of that donation, and it pays off when I give you the money.
But that 40 billion does not account, that 40 billion in profit, that number comes from before we launched this war on Iran.
It does.
And
Absolutely.
They're probably going to have to move that decimal over one by the end of this. Because they're raking in, combined, the global oil companies alone are estimated at raking in about $1 billion.
Yeah, and it's amazing. More money in profits.
A billion additional.
And then more money because everybody has to buy more fuel. One of the interesting things, I wanted to add this in just as a side note, because I kind of think it's a little bit funny the way politics works. I don't know if you remember 6 months ago, Trump went on a tirade and did some executive orders, and he wanted to take more of the Alaskan forest and give it to the oil companies and let them get contracts there. The funniest part of that one to me, the ironic part, was the oil executives looked at this and said,
no thanks.
We don't need more land. And why don't they need more land? Because they've been given so many contracts since the George W. Bush administration. They couldn't drill at all the contracts they had.
Plus, they've discovered Alaska's much more expensive place to do that.
It is, in fact. But it was the same thing in Venezuela. It's
same thing.
Do we really want Venezuela?
They didn't want Venezuela.
Yeah.
It's the same we talked about in our last episode, right? With the military-industrial complex over decades, members of Congress approving weapon systems, and particularly fighter and bomber planes, that the Air Force, we don't want this. We don't even know what to do with it if we get it. So
exactly. And in the case of oil, if they drill more, they get more out of the ground, and then supply and demand kicks in and oil prices go down. So they need to.
How do we fix it, Brian? How do we fix it? I think you told us at the beginning, but I didn't hear anyone knocking at the door. So
I have not heard anyone knocking at the door, which first of all means we're not broadcasting this live.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
And second, I don't know if we have a high enough viewership. If Trump talks about us on Truth Social, you'll know we've made the big time.
But do we really need to be broadcasting this live for them to be listening in? I don't think so.
Oh no. I'm pretty sure all my stuff's being monitored, but I'm sure my stuff's being monitored by the Rwandan government, though I'm not sure about the U.S. government yet. So
is there really a difference?
Maybe not. That's a good point. Anyway, we're running up on an hour, so we should finish it out. How do we fix it? This is the classic case of money in politics writ large. And Citizens United was such an enormous step. The oil industry existed and was profiting before Citizens United, but it was profiting in the tens and hundreds of millions, not in the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. Getting more information out to people, doing things like this and spreading the word on things like this so people understand what their legislators are actually voting for, what the president's actually saying when they talk about oil. Most people hear oil politics and they don't shut their ears. They just stop listening at all and they go on and talk about something else until the next topic comes up because it's so damn boring. We need to make this an issue that people understand how much money it's costing them. Honestly, the one thing that I would say from a side of things Republicans and Democrats can come together around, you know how I love those words, is pollution. Climate change is a loser. Climate change has become politicized, and people on the right in the United States automatically shut their ears when you talk about climate change. But if you talk about factories polluting the air in rural communities and in post-industrial communities, and you talk about that toxic waste spill in Palestine, Ohio, and you talk about oil spills that are damaging the coastlines, people actually care about that stuff. And people
we disagree on both of these things. You're the more economic, what's the word? I don't want to say radical because I'm trying to be serious here.
Yeah.
But you have a more aggressive approach,
right,
when it comes to economic change. I have the more aggressive one when it comes to political. I firmly believe there is no longer a possibility in the United States of America, on our territory, to change this system from within. The only hope for a future democracy and a future functioning, fair economy is change of the political system. I really think it's gone that far. I don't, and on the more narrow messaging, I don't think pollution's the winner. I think that we have demonstrated as a society that all we care about is money, whether you're super rich or whether we're lower middle class. I think it is the escalating insurance costs for homeowners insurance, the denial of flood insurance, fire insurance, disaster insurance, or the increasing rates for those. That's what will wake people up. The reason for those increases are climate change, because the insurance companies only care. They don't like to pay out, and people's homes are burning down and getting flooded. So they're raising rates, and that hurts us, and that's the way to get it.
I'm going to suggest one thing to change. I agree mostly with what you said at the end. You are definitely more Dr. Doom than I am. The one thing I will say,
only about gloom.
Right, doom and gloom. The one thing I will say is when you talk about homeowners insurance, absolutely talk about homeowners insurance, but talk about floods and wildfires, not climate change. If you just floods and wildfires, you win more people over than if you say climate change.
And you can get agriculture by talking about drought insurance.
Exactly. These words have been demonized, and we got to be careful that we don't use the demonized words, because we agree on a lot of the other words.
Yeah, but I don't agree with you. And on that note, thank you for tuning into this episode of the World Discord Podcast.
Thank you all very much.
Tell your friends, tell your enemies.
Absolutely. Thank you, David, for producing, and we will see you next time around. Have a good one, folks.
Bye, folks.